Hello, everyone. Welcome into another episode of Bolt Breakdowns here on the Guilty as Charged podcast YouTube channel. My name is Alex. As always, we are here to talk about the most recent Chargers game that just happened, and it was their first shitstorm game of the season, if you will. 40-17 loss to the Bucs. That does not inspire all that much confidence prior to having to play the Broncos on Thursday night football. I guess this is the first real blowout of the Harbaugh era. The Steelers won by 10, but that was, a double-digit win for them, if you want to call it that. But that was kind of, Herbert coming out of the game, defense kind of losing sort of its edge after that point, after the offense couldn't sustain drives. This was just, by contrast, a relentless ass beating. Really, for a lot of the game. Now, people will counter that statement and say the Chargers had the lead at halftime, which they did, 17-13. They got the ball back, had a chance to kind of make that a two-possession game. A couple opportunities in which they could have made it a two-possession game, but I still felt like deep in my chest, we have to talk about the defense first, actually. I want to talk about the offense, but the offense is kind of the same stuff we talk about every week, so I don't know how much of it is, necessarily 100% worth repeating on the front end. But this was the first real defensive collapse for the Chargers, and yeah, I think you can go back to like the Cincinnati second half. I think you can go back to moments, and certainly they were not doing their best this season. But at times it wasn't okay. Well, like, they don't know where to be on the play. The Bucs are getting whatever they want. This was a different level of that kind of stuff versus with Cincinnati. It's like, okay, eventually Cincinnati's offense was going to get going. They have the big playmakers. This was just absolutely confidence not in destroying. They are not able to force a punt on the Bucs the whole game. I have to believe, without having to look back, that is the first game in which the Chargers did not force a punt in the Harbaugh era. And looking back in retrospect, I think it's different when you're watching the game in real time and you're like, "Woo, Joey fumble," and you're like, "Oh, the interception by Tarheeb Still, which was brilliantly a great jump of the route to be able to get that turnover." But the Bucs were still comfortably at around 150, 200 yards by halftime. And obviously they wind up over 500 yards for the game. And it felt like unless the Chargers got a turnover, unless Baker made some kind of bad decision, the Bucs were getting whatever they wanted over the field, whether that was in the first half or in the second half. And then I think the collapse over the middle of the field opens a lot of opportunities for the Bucs kind of on the boundary later in that game. Obviously, they get the Mike Evans touchdown in the second half, in which Tarheeb Still is not able to get him out of bounds. Another play that I noticed that I think summarized a lot of the Chargers' issues throughout the day in terms of just playing defense with where you're supposed to be spatially. There's a 3rd and 5. This is in the first half, in which they have a chance to get the Bucs off the field with a full minute 30 left and 2 timeouts. And they opt, the Bucs kind of have this package in which Rashad White is like sort of bouncing around the line of scrimmage. He, has a chance to be a receiving target for Baker. And then Cam Hart is kind of stuck onto him because that's the responsibility. Derwin, I believe, is stuck onto Cade Otton. And Baker just kind of runs right in between Derwin and Cam Hart to be able to pick up a first down 21-yard run on that 3rd and 5. And that was a play that was kind of indicative, I think, of the Chargers' second half defensive effort a little bit too. If you think there's like a, obviously, yes, the second half defense was worse, but I think in terms of showing signs of, crumbling before it completely crumbled, that was a play that I sort of noticed where the Chargers just weren't, 100% convinced on where they were supposed to be at any given time, whether that was the secondary, whether that was the linebacker group. Um, and I think it also stems obviously from the pass rush in this game and the lack of one, to be honest. They get a little bit of momentum in the second quarter. I think pass rush wise start to rack up some more pressures on Mayfield, but man, that Bucs offensive line really just determined coming out of halftime, like, hey, you're not gonna get anything on us. And I think there's no better way to kind of recap what happened after halftime to a degree than that first Bucs drive on a halftime, in which they go 5 plays, 83 yards, 3 minutes after the Chargers punt. Bucky Irving up the middle, 6 yards. Bucky Irving up the middle, 5 yards. Bucky Irving for 18 yards to the left side. Baker Mayfield short to Bucky Irving. Okay, lost -3 yards. And then that is the Baker Mayfield play to Mike Evans, which is the 57-yard touchdown. And then, they had a lot of similar drives in which the run game was starting to give them problems. And when the run game plus Baker's movement was starting to give them problems, it got ugly real fast. So it's, again, the first real disaster Minter game, if you want to call it that. I also do think it is, obviously on the players themselves too. But that just, I understand the Bucs obviously were a top 5 offense recently coming into this game, but the amount of times it felt like the Chargers were unprepared, in terms of where to be, confused about where to line up, who had which responsibility. That was something that was a little unnerving to see, especially because, look, team plays in 3 days against Denver. And, another over 500 team that is capable of playing, good ball, as we've seen recently with them. And that's not, necessarily the defensive performance you most recently won on tape before going to Denver. Obviously, you'd like to flash it. So this disappointing day from a defense that I thought was kind of past the turd bombing game, if you will. It just didn't go their way today defensively. And I look, I do think their effort next game out will be better. That is not, necessarily something I think is up for debate, but I certainly did not, think that they would struggle with a lot of the tackling angles, a lot of the where to be at what time, a lot of the things that go into each play from a game plan, and just kind of as we've talked about Minter's defense being read and react. I certainly did not expect them to read each play and then react kind of sometimes as poorly and slowly as they did in real time. So certainly from an efficiency standpoint, this was the worst, Minter defense game to watch in real time in terms of them not having the answers. And I'm sure on tape it's not all that much better. So yeah, they have some things to figure out. This pass rush has gone cold, and unfortunately, it is not just the Bucs who have a good offensive line. It is the Broncos who have a really good offensive line and pass protection scheme, and the Chargers are going to have to figure out a way. Like, hey, how do we buy some pressures here? because really, other than that second quarter, they weren't getting much. And the Broncos aren't necessarily known for their run game either, but I think Tampa, for as much as their run game is a little bit different, it showed teams some of the weaknesses in the Minter light box approach when you also have the type of passing offense that they do with Liam Cohen and Baker Mayfield, as well as Mike Evans is a huge piece of that as well. The two running backs and Rachaad White and Bucky Irving and their presences. So I think it was a weird personnel matchup for the Chargers to have to deal with, but they certainly didn't necessarily meet the moment on teams that have athletic running backs, a quarterback that can move, as well as somebody like Evans. That was a disappointing aspect for them. Past the pass rush, when we talk about the linebackers and secondary, there is the Cam Hart injury to discuss. He was concussed, and I doubt that he's going to be cleared for Thursday Night Football. But that you're going to be down another corner potentially. We'll see exactly what they decide to do, but that's certainly not something that you necessarily want going into game day on TNF there. But I guess I'll wrap up my thoughts on the defense just by saying, I do, because of the problems that they're also having on offense right now, they can't afford to have this defensive game, right? We've talked about a lot of the shootouts over the years that like the Chiefs and the Bills had, and some playoff games kind of turn into, what's happened with like I said, Chiefs Bills games in the past, or kind of what the Bucs were doing to an extent, and it's like your offense to some extent has to respond a lot better than they did in this game consistently from drive to drive to drive, and the Chargers couldn't. And I think when you talk about the playoff football aspect of this team, I do not think against frequently more better competition that the Chargers are just going to be able to kind of stonewall people defensively, as we've seen the whole season. So then, to give their defense a breather, the offense is also going to need to step up. The defense played 37 minutes, 36 minutes and 48 seconds in terms of time of possession today that the Bucs had. And that's just not a sustainable method to really win, right? I think you saw that very much at points in this game in which the Chargers could not control the clock at all in the second half, and a lot of the defensive issues roll on and get worse. And obviously, how you play offense, defense, special teams, it's all connected, right? You can't necessarily isolate the two variables. And so, yeah, this was the roughest game of the season defensively, and I think you felt that extra because of the state of the offense, which let's talk about it. I will, kind of talk about what I just talked about, in which, we talked about how the Bucs were never forced into a punt on the drives in which the Chargers were not able to. They get the interception, which guides them into a 3-play, 27-yard touchdown series, which ends with the Quentin Johnston score. If you take their, plays off of turnovers, or drives off of turnovers, I should say, off, in which, they had to start in worse positions on the field, they essentially score, obviously they didn't score anything after halftime. But they essentially come away with that first touchdown drive, which ends in the Ladd McConkey touchdown, and one field goal to be able to match the Bucs at 10-10 early. And every script they pretty much had after that didn't really go their way. They did get that short field and were able to flip it into the QJ touchdown, like I said. Didn't score anything after that, because that was 17 points. So I guess my question is, what do they want this offense to be? Right. And we've talked about this the whole season. This is not a new topic, right, of discussion. But, there were quotes in April talking about how Greg Roman wants to set up this run game, and, imagine Herbert with an elite run game and all that. And look, there are a lot of challenges with doing that right now that don't exclusively fall on Greg Roman, without a doubt. No J.K. Dobbins, interior offensive line, et cetera, et cetera. That being said, consistently from down to down, I do think it lies on the offensive coordinator somewhat to kind of like determine what works for the team. And you do got to scheme something, right, in terms of not just, allowing the offensive game plan to be, okay, here's, Ladd, QJ Palmer, Tucker Fisk, Stone Smart, and, Gus Edwards, and, somebody's going to make a play. And it really does feel like this is what this offense relies on, which is just like kind of mind-numbing, because they have to find a way to start getting like some easier sources of offense. Problem is, anytime they try something screen adjacent, anytime they try something that's kind of like short field to be able to like get a missed tackle somewhere, defenses are able to kind of easily convert on them in those areas. And anytime I felt like they tried a screen in this game, it kind of ended up being a negative play. And we've seen this for the Chargers in the past, in which they've either taken a screen or a dump off, and it goes, oftentimes backwards for them. They aren't able to kind of like shift momentum and make some plays in short yardage that set themselves up. So then a lot of it is just like, okay, is Ladd going to get open? Yes or no? Okay, then you converted the play. Is QJ or Palmer going to get open? No. Does one of them have a busted coverage? Okay, then like maybe you'll convert, maybe you won't. Other than that, again, like they just don't have a lot of consistent methods to beat you down to down. It's absolutely partially injuries. I do not want to take that away, as a reason to blame, because we're all watching the same defense. We're all watching the same offense. We're all watching what they're doing from down to down, and a lot of that is personnel related. That being said, I don't know what the direction of what they're supposed to do is, whether that is fully leaning into Justin Herbert, which they seemed even kind of hesitant about doing today because they didn't really have the pass protection to be able to hold up. Not to mention Herbert's out there with the big fat ankle, as Joey Bosa described. So they don't really trust their pass protection. They don't trust their run blocking, particularly at all. And I think it makes it obvious in moments where what do they trust? And Harbaugh, last week, I'm not going to harp on this too much. I already harped on it, during the Chiefs week episode. But Harbaugh crossed the 50-yard line twice and had an opportunity to either go for it on fourth down or, essentially have kind of a moment in which you would allow Dicker to kick the field goal. They opted to punt and save field position. They do that again in this game with a 4th and 5 in the second quarter, in which they opt to essentially kick the ball back to the Bucs. They net 20 yards on a punt because J.K. Scott kicks it into the end zone. I bring that sequence up because Jim Harbaugh, by no means is Dan Campbell, right? I do not expect him to go for every single fourth down. I do not expect him to kick every single 60-yard field goal. That being said, I think a lot of the coaching decisions that he has made have been in the name of risk minimization because he doesn't trust the offense. And that is a real problem that dates, that links back to Greg Roman, that links back to Jim Harbaugh, that links back to pass protection, to run blocking, whatever you want to, the individual performances, right? You can talk about a lot of stuff encapsulated in that. But the way I would kind of put that is Dan Campbell, for example, is not this necessarily like, I'm just going to go for it on fourth down just for the sake of going for it. He trusts he trusts his options, right? Whether that is Jameer Gibbs, whether that's Amon-Ra, whether that's Jared Goff just making the right play, the offensive line, right? And I just think you see a version of that now in which Jim Harbaugh, you know, thinks about going for it sometimes, but clearly I think does not trust his offense enough to leave them on the field. Herbert's health, I'm sure to some extent, plays into this. Now, that sequence was not what lost them the game. I'm not harping on that in that way. But what I do harp on that sequence with is I just don't think the Chargers internally believe anything that they're doing on offense right now. And I think when they consistently cross the 50-yard line and have a chance to score in games in which they have to keep up the score, they would rather throw it back to the defense and go, okay, defense, get us a stop, get us an interception, get us a turnover on downs, whatever it might be. And that's a problem in these games where you have no chance in hell on stopping them defensively. Before I go too far in excoriating the offense like we always do, I do think there were positive performances. Quentin Johnson probably had one of his better games, although the last Herbert ball track was not necessarily great. Stone Smart had an all right game. Did come up with a fumble at the end, which I mean the game was already well over by that point. But he did draw 2 penalties, came up with a couple catches. But again, I think that the coaching decisions that Harbaugh has made is directly related to they don't have the faith in the philosophy of their offense right now, and B, faith in personnel. And when I think you look at both of those things, it's just very apparent in how the Chargers are playing football right now. So I think you kind of have to hope that in the next couple of days that gets better for the Chargers. I don't know exactly what the answer is against Denver, which is arguably one of the more challenging defensive matchups in terms of the pressures that Denver can throw at you, in terms of obviously having to deal with Patrick Surtain. So, yeah, the Chargers, as Jim Harbaugh said, have some soul searching to do after facing a lot of adversity, and put up or shut up time. This is put up or shut up time. And the way that I would describe this game, past the X's and O's, past the philosophy, past a lot of the stuff that we just talked about with both the defense and offense, and the same problems that they've been having in terms of not trusting their run game, trusting certain aspects of their pass game, but not others. All of this, in addition to the defensive meltdown today, you have to find a way to play 2 halves of football. And until the Chargers play 2 halves of football, I don't take them seriously. I'm not talking necessarily as about a team that can win from week to week. I believe they have the talent to do that. But I don't buy them certainly as this playoff team. Currently, they're slotted in the 7th seed, have a chance to jump back up into the 6th seed should they beat the Broncos. But right now, I don't know how you can kind of look this team straight in the eye and go, man, they're gonna, be that really consistent team from down in the playoffs, either offensively or defensively. I just don't think they've showed anyone enough so far, especially against better teams. And I think there's been a contingent of Chargers fans that have been mad whenever people are like, oh, well, play a team over 500, play a team over 500. And even sometimes I've thought this season that, for as well as the Chargers played against the Chiefs, for as, the fact that they never really got blown out in any of these games, even when they have maybe lost to a better team, even I was like, all right. But at some point, you got to beat a better team. Like at some point, you beat the better team and be the better team, right? If you are somebody that believes the Chargers have a full shot to continue to contend come playoff time, and the Chargers just haven't showed recent offensive performances to be able to keep up with some of these teams, barring the defense playing out of its mind. And when that falls apart, they fall apart. And even in their wins, the win against Denver was a kind of second half, no showing to some extent for them that made that game closer than it was in the first half. And so I worry about that in the Denver rematch, certainly. But, anyway, you could go through any game on the schedule that I have back here and basically be like, okay, what half didn't the Chargers show up in? Whether it's the first half, whether it's the second half, and it kind of varies from game to game, like we said. But whether it is coaching, whether it is, the offense falling apart, whether it's, in today's case, the defense falling apart, in addition to the offense not having horses to kind of run today, it's gonna be the undoing of this team, whether that comes in the playoffs, whether that comes before the playoffs, whenever it comes. The Chargers just have to find a way to be able to play more consistent ball. And I'll just be honest, I don't respect them as a contender when that's the performance that you put up in your building. In a game, not that you necessarily had to win, but in a game against another, playoff adjacent team who has a similar record to you, they got blown out. And this was not, an unbeatable Bucs team in that regard. I would argue they came into this game as the more injured team than the Chargers, with a lot of what they were cobbling together in the secondary. A lot of what they were doing, obviously, no Godwin, a lot of the things that they dealt with this season. So it's not even the Chargers can say, okay, well, we were just the more injured team. Like the Bucs were arguably more injured than they were. So I don't know. This is a game in which I felt like the offense and the players, the coaches, everyone just kind of gave up. In which when they were kind of getting kicked in the teeth, particularly in the second half, I felt like there were a lot of instances, even earlier in the first half, like I mentioned, with some of the coaching decisions in which they just kind of rolled over and died. If on defense they weren't getting a turnover, they certainly weren't getting a stop. If on offense, they weren't converting, some big pass play to Ladd down the field, they had no other answers. Or if they weren't getting bailed out by a penalty, right? Or, not I want to say bailed out, but if they weren't getting a penalty given to them, again, not many consistent ways to start the offense. So it's a lot of the same things that we talk about from week to week. I think Herbert's clearly not healthy. They don't trust the philosophy of this offense. They don't have the skill players. They don't have the horses. Greg Roman, the same things that we talk about. So I don't want to necessarily just keep saying the same stuff every week, even though that's what we have to do, is we talk about the same team that plays every week. But I don't know. Go into the Denver game and play and coach like you care, because that was an absolutely atrocious performance against Tampa Bay. Burn the tape, do whatever you have to do to come back, and hope that doesn't happen again. And if you really believe in yourselves as a playoff team, if I am supposed to believe in you as a playoff team, then don't play like that again. I don't know, but they'll play again in 3 days, and we'll see what improvements have been made between now and then. And look, no excuses this week. No excuses. All right. Home team, Thursday night football, on a short week. That is a spot in which you should win. I'm not saying every team that plays on Thursday night football at home wins the game. We just saw the Niners last week lose at home. But those situations certainly favor the home teams historically. And if the Chargers can't mentally or physically get off of the bus this game, I don't know what that says about them. I don't know. I don't know what team I'm watching sometimes in terms of their identity from an offensive or defensive standpoint when they're challenged by some of these better teams. I don't know what their identity is from a coaching standpoint when the coach consistently makes some decisions that show that he doesn't really believe in the team sometimes. Which I'm not saying is unfair, but it's what happens. And look, I'll also say this. As well as Herbert played last week, didn't play that well this week. He's also getting slammed in the pocket. So there's that, and I get it. But, like, I don't know, guys. Just come out next game and please at least pretend like you care.